There's a specific kind of loneliness that nobody talks about. Not the kind you feel at 2 a.m. when the house is too quiet. Not the kind that hits when you scroll through your phone and realize you have no one to call. No. I'm talking about the loneliness you feel when you're surrounded by people who need you, when your whole world is full, but you're completely empty. That was Dylan's life. Dylan Ford, 36 years old, father of one 6-year-old girl named Poppy, a man who made lunches at 6 a.m., attended every single school play, remembered which stuffed animal needed to sleep on the left side of the bed, and hadn't been on a date in 4 years. Not because he was unlovable, not because no one was interested, but because somewhere along the way, Dylan Ford had quietly decided that love was no longer something he was allowed to want. And then, his boss walked into his life. Or rather, he walked into hers, and nothing, not one single thing, was ever the same again. Let me take you back to the beginning, to a Tuesday in late October, the kind of Tuesday that smells like burnt coffee and printer toner. Dylan had been working at Halcyon Financial Consulting for about 3 years at this point. He was good at his job, really good actually, the kind of employee who never missed a deadline, never complained about overtime, always stayed late, because going home to an empty apartment after dropping Poppy at his sister's wasn't exactly a rush. His co-workers liked him. They described him the same way every time. Dylan? Oh, he's solid. Reliable. Good guy. Good guy. That was the phrase that followed Dylan Ford everywhere like a shadow he couldn't shake. Not exciting. Not interesting. Not someone you'd think about at 11 p.m. when you couldn't sleep. Just good. He wore the same rotation of 5 collared shirts. He brought the same turkey sandwich every single Monday. He drank his coffee black, not because he liked it that way, but because remembering to buy creamer felt like one too many things on his list. His desk had exactly 2 personal items on it. A small laminated drawing that Poppy had made of the 2 of them. Stick figures holding hands under a yellow sun with too many rays. And a sticky note she'd pressed to his laptop one morning that said, in her 6-year-old handwriting, "Daddy is the best, no returns." He'd laughed when she gave it to him. And he laughed every time he looked at it. It was the only thing in that office that ever made him forget, even for a second, that he was tired. Because Dylan Ford was tired. People. Not the kind of tired that sleep fixes. The kind that settles into your bones when you've been strong for too long. He'd been Poppy's sole parent since she was 2 years old. Her mother, his ex-wife, Renee, had left. Not dramatically. Not with a fight or a door slamming. She'd just slowly stopped showing up. First it was the bedtimes, then the weekends. Then one morning Dylan woke up and realized Renee hadn't called Poppy in 11 days. That was the day something in him went quiet. Not bitter. Not angry. Well, maybe a little angry. But mostly quiet. He packed that part of himself away. The part that wanted to be chosen, to be loved, and to matter to someone over the age of 6. And he focused on what was in front of him. Poppy. Always Poppy. She was worth it. She was worth every sacrifice, every lonely Saturday night, every moment he sat across from his sister at family dinners, while everyone else had a partner to pass the bread to. She was worth all of it. But that didn't make the emptiness disappear. It just made it easier to ignore. And Dylan had gotten very, very good at ignoring things. Now, the reason I'm telling you all of this is because you need to understand the shape of the man that walked through the doors of Halcyon Financial on that Tuesday in late October. Because that was the day everything changed. That was the day Dylan first met Petra Callum. Petra Callum was not what anyone expected. And I mean that in the best possible way. She was 34 years old, compact, sharp. The kind of woman who walked into a room and somehow the room rearranged itself around her without her asking. She had dark auburn hair that she kept in a low bun that always looked like it was one bad meeting away from coming completely undone, which, if you knew Petra, was basically a metaphor for everything. She had this habit, when she was thinking, of pressing her thumbnail against her bottom lip and staring at the middle distance like she was solving an equation no one else could see. Her humor was dry. Devastatingly dry. The kind where you laughed 3 seconds after she said the thing. She'd been brought in as the new Regional Director of Operations, a title that, at Halcyon, it basically meant she was in charge of everything that mattered and responsible for everything that went wrong. She'd transferred from the Denver branch. Rumor had it she'd turned that office around in 18 months, tripled productivity, restructured 2 entire departments, fired someone on her first day because they lied about knowing Excel. People were nervous. Dylan wasn't nervous. He didn't have the bandwidth to be nervous. He had 17 open client files, a parent-teacher conference on Thursday, and he'd promised Poppy he'd figure out how to make homemade mac and cheese by Friday. The real kind, she'd said. Not the box kind, Daddy. I'm 6, not a baby. So no. Dylan was not nervous about the new boss. He was, however, unprepared. The first time he saw Petra, she was standing in the middle of the open plan office with a coffee in one hand and a thick manila folder in the other, looking around the space like she was cataloging every single inefficiency at once. She had this expression on her face. Not disapproving, exactly. More like assessing. The way a chess player looks at the board before making their first move. Dylan walked past her on the way to the copy room. He didn't say anything. He was carrying a stack of reports and thinking about Poppy's Halloween costume, which was only 8 days away, and he still hadn't found the right shade of purple for the witch hat. You! He stopped. He turned. Petra was looking directly at him. Yes? You're Ford, right? Dylan Ford? Senior analyst? That's me. She held out the manila folder. The Hargrove account. Now, I need a full breakdown of the last 2 quarters by end of day. Can you do that? He blinked. Not because it was a lot to ask, because the last senior analyst she'd apparently asked had said he was pretty swamped. Dylan took the folder. Sure. She looked at him for exactly 1 beat longer than was strictly necessary, and then she walked away. That was it. That was their first conversation. And honestly, Dylan didn't think about it much afterward. He did the Hargrove breakdown. He had it on her desk by 4:30. He picked up Poppy. He attempted the mac and cheese, slightly lumpy, but Poppy declared it almost as good as the box kind, which is a compliment, Daddy. And he put her to bed and fell asleep on the couch with a half-read brief on his chest. Just another Tuesday. Except the next morning, where there was a sticky note on his computer screen. Not from Poppy this time. It said, Hargrove breakdown. Best work I've seen since I got here. PC. Dylan stared at it. He didn't know what to do with it. So he stuck it next to Poppy's note and went back to work. Here's the thing about Dylan Ford. He was not oblivious. I want to be very clear about that. He was not one of those men who couldn't read a room. He'd been a husband. He'd been in love. He knew what it looked like when someone was interested in him. He just chose not to see it. Because seeing it meant doing something about it. And doing something about it meant opening that locked, quiet part of himself that he'd put away 4 years ago. And he wasn't ready for that. So when Petra started doing the things she started doing, Dylan noticed. He just filed it under "not for me" and moved on. It started small, the way these things always do. She began stopping by his desk. Not every day, that would have been obvious, but often, more often than she stopped by anyone else's. She'd ask about projects, give him feedback, stand a little too close when she was reading over his shoulder. Once, just once, she reached past him to point something out on his screen, and her hand accidentally brushed his shoulder, and she pulled back like she'd touched a hot stove. She covered it smoothly. Petra covered everything smoothly. But Dylan noticed. He noticed the way she laughed just a little too quickly at the things he said. He noticed that she remembered things, small, specific things, that he'd mentioned in passing. He'd mentioned once, offhandedly, or that Poppy was obsessed with ladybugs. A week later, a little enamel ladybug pin appeared on the edge of his desk with no note. He looked up. Across the office, Petra was staring at her computer screen with great intensity. He kept the pin. He didn't say anything. His colleague and closest friend at the office, a lanky, eternally caffeinated man named Soren Albrecht, noticed before Dylan would admit it. "Dude," Soren said one afternoon, sliding into the chair across from Dylan's desk with the subtlety of a foghorn. "Our boss likes you." Dylan didn't look up from his screen. "She likes good work. She gave you the Kellerman account. Because I'm good at—" "She gave herself the Kellerman account last quarter," Soren said, pointing his pen at him. "She handed it to you. That's a $50,000 client. Dill. She's delegating. To you, specifically, not me, not Trish, not Hale, who's been here for literally 9 years. Soren leaned back with the expression of a man who has figured out the puzzle and is very smug about it. She likes you. Dylan finally looked up. Soren. Yeah? Drop it. Soren opened his mouth. I said drop it. The mouth closed, but Soren's eyes said everything they needed to say, and Dylan went back to his work, ignoring the part of his chest that had quietly caught fire. 3 weeks into Petra's tenure at Halcyon, Dylan had what he would later describe as the worst planned coincidence of my life. It was a Friday afternoon. His sister Lara, Poppy's usual after-school pickup, had a minor car emergency. Nothing serious. But she couldn't get Poppy from school, and the school closed at 6. And the nanny Dylan occasionally used was in Ohio for a family thing, and he was in the middle of a client call that was running long, and he was panicking. Quietly. The way he panicked about everything, completely internally, with a face that showed nothing. Except Petra walked past his desk and stopped. You okay? Fine. You're doing the thing where you stare at your phone like you want it to spontaneously solve your problems. He looked up. She was standing with her arms loosely crossed, watching him with that assessing look she had. My daughter's school closes at 6, he said, because there was no point lying. I have a client call that's running until 5:30 and my backup fell through. Petra was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. Go. I can't. The call is with Barton Hughes, right? Yes. I'll take it. I know the account. Go get your kid. He stared at her. Petra. Dylan. Her voice was even, but there was something underneath it. Something warm, something that she tucked away almost as fast as it appeared. "Go, I've got it." He went. He made it to the school with 11 minutes to spare. And when he got there, Poppy ran at him full speed the way she always did, like she hadn't seen him in years instead of 8 hours, and hit him so hard in the midsection that he nearly lost his balance. And he laughed, really laughed, the kind that loosened something in your chest. He held his daughter and thought about a woman who had stepped into a client call without hesitation so he could make it to his kids' school. He didn't know what to do with that either. So he took Poppy for ice cream and told her about his day. Well, most of it. But the following Monday, he stopped by Petra's office before the day got started. She was already at her desk, which didn't surprise him. He'd started to notice she was always the first one in. "Hey." She looked up. "The Barton Hughes call," he said. "How did it go?" "Good. They're extending the contract." "Really?" The corner of her mouth lifted. Turns out they wanted someone to actually push back on their Q4 projections instead of just nodding. I pushed back. She tilted her head. "Your work, though. I was working with your numbers." Still, she agreed. He stood there for a moment, something sitting in the air between them, neither of them moving to name it. "Thank you," he said. "Genuinely." She looked at him for a long second. "How old is she?" 6. Her name's Poppy." Something moved across Petra's face, just briefly, and something soft. "That's a good name." "She chose it herself," he said. "Well, she didn't choose it, but when she was about 2, she decided her name was Poppy, and we had to call her that or she wouldn't answer, and it kind of just stuck." Petra let out a small laugh, real, unguarded, the kind she didn't let out in meetings. "Smart kid," she said. "Terrifyingly smart," he agreed. And then a colleague walked past, and the moment dissolved, and they both went back to being professional, and Dylan walked back to his desk thinking, "Stop it! Just stop it!" Here is what Dylan never said out loud to anyone. Not to Soren, not to his sister Lara, not to anyone. What he never said was this: he was scared. Not of rejection. He could handle rejection. He'd been through worse. He was scared of what came after. Because what came after rejection wasn't nothing. What came after was the feeling of having tried, of having let himself want something, and then having it taken away. And the last time that happened, he'd spent 6 months barely functioning, getting through the days on autopilot, putting Poppy to bed, and then sitting on the bathroom floor because it was the only room in the apartment where she couldn't see him fall apart. He'd come back from that. He had. But he couldn't go back there. He would not go back there. And so the logic, if you can call it logic, was clean and simple in his head. Don't start. Don't hope. Don't reach. Keep everything exactly as it is. Because what it is manageable. And manageable is safe. And safe means Poppy has a father who is present and functional and whole. That was the wall. What ended had served him well. Right up until it didn't. Every year, Halcyon Financial threw a holiday party. Nothing too extravagant. Rented conference space at a hotel downtown, open bar, awkward dancing, the kind of event that people complained about attending and then stayed at until midnight. Dylan had gone every year. He always left by 9. This year was going to be the same. He told himself that on the way there. He told himself that while he nursed his first drink at the bar. He told himself that right up until Petra walked in. She was wearing a deep green dress. Nothing dramatic. Not the kind that turned every head in the room. Just the kind that turned his. She looked different outside the office. softer somehow. On her hair was down. He'd never seen it down, and it fell past her shoulders in loose waves, and she had a small pair of gold earrings that caught the light when she turned her head, which she did almost immediately when she entered the room, and she turned it directly toward him. She found him instantly, like she'd known exactly where he was going to be standing. She smiled, just slightly, and crossed the room. Ford. Callum. You look like you're already planning your exit, she said, reading him perfectly. 9 o'clock, he confirmed. That's, she checked her watch, 42 minutes away. 42 very long minutes. She laughed and took the drink the bartender handed her and leaned against the bar next to him. Not in front of him, next to him. And they stood there together, watching the room. And it was the most natural thing in the world. They talked. Not about work. For the first time, genuinely not about work. She told him she'd grown up in rural Vermont, the daughter of a librarian and a man who fixed boats, and that she'd gotten into finance because she wanted to understand the system that ran everything, and that she still wasn't sure she understood it. He told her about growing up in Cincinnati, about his father, who had worked double shifts his whole life and never once complained, about how he'd learned to cook from a food blog because after Renee left, the first thing Poppy had asked for was homemade pancakes, and he'd never made pancakes from scratch in his life, but he'd figured it out. He hadn't meant to say that much. He didn't know why he had. Petra was quiet for a moment after he said it. "Oh, she's lucky," she said, "to have you." "I'm the lucky one," he said, and he meant it. Petra looked at him. The noise of the party faded for just a moment. She opened her mouth, and then someone grabbed her elbow, the head of the Chicago branch, some guy named Holt who spoke in exclamation points, and she was pulled away, turning back once to look at Dylan with an expression he couldn't quite decode. He left at 9. But he thought about that almost sentence for 3 days. January came. Cold. Relentless. The kind of Chicago January that makes you question every life decision that led you to this latitude. Work picked up. A major restructure was announced. Petra was in back-to-back meetings for 2 weeks straight. Dylan barely saw her, and he told himself he didn't notice. He didn't notice. He absolutely, completely did not notice. He noticed. He noticed the way the office felt flatter when she wasn't visible. He noticed that he checked his email more frequently, which was ridiculous. He noticed that Soren was watching him with the triumphant patience of a man waiting for an admission. "I don't want to talk about it," Dylan said on a Thursday, to no one in particular, because Soren hadn't said anything. Soren just stirred his coffee. "I said I don't want to talk about it." "I didn't say anything." "You were about to." "I was about to ask if you wanted the last of the break room donuts." Dylan looked at him. "Yes," he said. "I want the donuts." The restructure meeting happened on a Wednesday. 15 people in a conference room. Dylan sat near the back. Petra stood at the front, presenting the new departmental framework she'd built. And she was something. There was no other word for it. She was precise and clear, and she handled the difficult questions with the kind of patience that wasn't passive. It was deliberate. She cared about the people in that room. Even when she was delivering news they didn't like. It was in the way she looked at each of them directly, the way she didn't dodge. At one point she was going through the slide about the account redistribution, and Dylan's name came up. She paused just for a beat when she said it. Her eyes moved to him. Just for a beat. He didn't look away. Neither did she. Someone asked a question, and the moment broke, and Dylan spent the rest of the meeting staring at the table. After the meeting, people filed out. Dylan stayed to gather his papers. He was the last one. Or almost. Ford. He looked up. Petra was still at the front of the room, gathering her laptop. "You could have left with everyone else," she said. "I could have." She looked at him. And this time the thing in the air between them had a different weight. "Dylan. Petra." They both stopped. "You first," she said. He stood there, with every single thing he wasn't letting himself say locked tight in his chest. "Nothing," he said. "It's nothing. Good meeting." And he left. And he stood in the hallway outside and pressed his back against the wall and closed his eyes and thought, "What is wrong with you?" February. Valentine's Day, specifically. Which, and Dylan would like it noted, he had not thought about until Poppy came home from school with 24 construction paper hearts that her class had made, sat down at the kitchen table, and said, with the gravity of a very small senior senator, "Daddy, do you have a Valentine?" He was making dinner. He didn't look up from the stove. "I have you." "That's not the same," she said with devastating accuracy. "You need a grown-up Valentine." "I'm fine, baby." Poppy was quiet, which was rare and therefore alarming. He looked over. She was picking at the edge of one of her paper hearts with the expression of someone working up to saying something. "Daddy, are you lonely?" The spoon stopped. He turned fully. Poppy was 6. She wasn't supposed to ask questions like that. He crossed to her and crouched down to her level. "Where did that come from?" "Aunt Lara says you work too much," she said, with the careful honesty of a child repeating something she'd heard. "And she says you deserve to be happy." She looked up at him. "Are you happy?" He looked at his daughter, at her dark eyes, and her gap-toothed smile, and the little smudge of glitter glue still on her cheek from her craft project. "I am happy," he said. And he meant it. "You make me happy." "But what about when I'm asleep?" she asked. He had no answer for that. He pulled her into a hug instead, and she let him, small arms wrapping around his neck. And he held her for a long moment thinking about an empty couch at 11 p.m., and a woman in a green dress, and a locked part of himself, and a question he didn't know how to answer. The next day at work, there was a small potted succulent on his desk. No note. He looked across the office. Petra was in her office, on the phone, back half-turned to the room. He stared at the succulent for a long time. Then he got up, walked to her office, knocked on the open door. Where she held up a finger, one moment, finished her call, and turned to him. "The succulent," he said. She met his eyes steadily. "Succulents are low maintenance," she said. "Good for people with a lot going on." "Petra." "Dylan." "Why are you—" He stopped, started again. "What are you doing?" Her chin lifted slightly. "I don't know what you mean." "Yes, you do." A pause. Something moved through her expression, not uncertainty, exactly. More like a decision being made. "You're smart," she said quietly. "I think you know exactly what I mean." She held his gaze. "And I think you've been choosing not to." He didn't say anything. She nodded once, slowly. "Okay," she said. "Okay." She turned back to her desk. "Was there anything else?" He stood there for 3 full seconds. "No," he said, and walked back to his desk, and sat there staring at the succulent for the rest of the morning. "I told you," Soren said, with the controlled delight of a man who has been waiting months for this moment. They were in the break room. Dylan was on his second coffee. He'd told Soren about the succulent and the conversation, and the way she'd said, "I think you know exactly what I mean," because at this point he needed to say it out loud to someone, or he was going to lose his mind. "She's my boss," Dylan said. "She's a person," Soren said. "Who is a person who is clearly into you. She literally decides whether I get a performance review. She literally got you a plant because she thinks you deserve nice things. Come on, man." "It's complicated." Soren put his coffee mug down. "Dill." His voice dropped, losing the teasing edge. "I say this as someone who has watched you eat the same turkey sandwich every Monday for 3 years, and has never once seen you take a personal call at lunch." He looked at him evenly. "When's the last time you let yourself want something?" Dylan looked at his coffee. Poppy. "Poppy is your reason why," Soren said. "She's not a reason to stop living." He picked his mug back up. "I'm just saying, it might be worth finding out what happens if you stop running." Dylan didn't answer. But he carried the question home with him. He was still carrying it at 10:30 that night, sitting on his couch in the quiet apartment after Poppy was asleep, looking at the succulent he'd brought home because he didn't know what else to do with it, when his phone buzzed. A text. From Petra. It said, "You left your laptop charger at the office. I put it in your drawer so no one walks off with it." He stared at the text. It was 10:30 at night. She was still at the office. He typed back, "You're still there?" 3 dots. "Finishing the Henderson review. Don't tell HR." He almost smiled. He typed, "Henderson's not worth losing sleep over." She typed, "Neither are most things." A pause. Then, "Good night, Dylan." He held the phone and typed, "Good night, Petra," and sat there in the quiet apartment, not feeling quite as empty as usual. March. The wall cracked first on a Thursday afternoon in the parking garage. Dylan had gotten a call from Poppy's school. Not an emergency. Poppy was fine, physically, but she'd had a hard day. A girl in her class had said something unkind about Poppy not having a mom. The school counselor had handled it beautifully, they said. Poppy had been very brave. But she'd cried. And she'd asked for Daddy. Dylan was in his car within 4 minutes. He was signing Poppy out of the counselor's office 7 minutes after that. And when she came out, red-eyed, bottom lip still shaky, clutching her backpack straps, she looked up at him and said, "I told her that having one amazing parent is better than having 2 bad ones." He didn't trust his voice for a second. He crouched down. "Who told you that?" "You did," she said. "When I was little?" He pulled her in. He held her in that school hallway and breathed in the smell of her hair and thought about all the things he couldn't protect her from and how much he wished he could. He held her together. And somewhere in his chest, something came loose. When he went back to the office that evening to finish a deadline, Poppy at his sister's, and the office was almost empty. Just the hum of the ventilation and the distant sound of keyboards. And Petra. She looked up when he walked in. "Hey," she said, reading his face immediately. "What happened?" He shook his head. "Nothing. Rough afternoon." She stood. "Dylan, I'm fine," he said. "I just need to finish the—" "Dylan." Her voice wasn't soft exactly, but it wasn't sharp either. It was just there, solid and present and not going anywhere. He stopped. She walked around her desk, stopped a few feet from him. She wasn't touching him. She wasn't even close enough to touch him. But somehow the distance felt very small. "What happened?" she asked again, and he told her. He told her about the school, about the girl, about what Poppy said. was about the feeling of holding his daughter in a hallway and wishing the world was kinder. He didn't plan to say all of it. But Petra listened. Really listened. Not the way people listen when they're waiting for their turn to talk, but the way where you feel like the room is holding still. And by the time he was done, the thing in his chest had shifted. Had opened? Just slightly. Just enough. She didn't offer advice. She didn't say it'll be okay, or she's so strong, or any of the things people usually said. She said, "She's got you, and you clearly show up." She held his gaze. "That's not nothing, Dylan. That's everything." He looked at her, across the small space of that empty office, and he thought, there it is. There is the thing I've been running from, standing right here, looking at me. Spring came to Chicago the way it always does, reluctantly, in fits and starts, one warm day followed by a cold snap, followed by a week of rain that made everyone slightly insane. Things between Dylan and Petra were charged. That's the only word for it. The professional dynamic was impeccable. She was his boss, he was her employee, the work was excellent, and the results were strong. But underneath all of it was this current, this low, constant hum that Dylan felt every time they were in the same room, that he was almost certain she felt too. She'd stopped initiating the small things, the sticky notes, the plants, the texts, not because she'd given up. He understood that now. She was giving him space. She was waiting, patient in the way that was more terrifying than pressure. And because pressure you could push back against, patience just waited and waited and waited. One afternoon in April, he was reviewing a report in the small conference room at the end of the hall, the one with the glass wall that looked over the city, when Petra knocked and came in. "Got a minute?" "Sure." She sat across from him. She had a tablet with her, but she set it face down on the table. "I want to talk to you about something," she said, "and I want you to know this is not a professional conversation." He went still. "Okay." She pressed her thumbnail against her lip. The thinking gesture. The one he had learned meant she was measuring her words. "I think you know," she said slowly, "that I've been letting you know over the past several months that I—" She stopped. "That I think you're remarkable, as a person, and not as an employee." She met his eyes. "And I think you've been deliberately not seeing it." Silence. "I'm not going to keep doing that," she said. "Not because I want to stop, I don't. But because I think you deserve the chance to make an actual choice, not a choice by avoidance." He looked at her. "Petra." "I'm not asking you for anything," she said. "I just want you to know that if you wanted to, if there was ever a day where you wanted to see what this could be—" She stopped. Drew a breath. "I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." The city spread out behind her through the glass, gray-blue and vast and indifferent, and Dylan sat across from the most quietly extraordinary woman he'd encountered in years and felt the wall in his chest trembling at its foundation. "I need time," he said. His voice came out rougher than he meant it to. She nodded once. "Okay. Petra. Dylan, it's okay." She stood, picked up her tablet. "Take your time." She was almost at the door when she stopped, didn't turn around. "For what it's worth, I'm a patient person." And she left. And Dylan sat in the conference room for a long time, looking at the city, feeling everything at once. He took his time. 2 more weeks, to be specific. 2 weeks of going back and forth inside his own head. 2 weeks of putting Poppy to bed and sitting with his thoughts. 2 weeks of watching Petra across the office. Professional, steady, giving him exactly the space she said she would, and feeling something grow in him that was too big to keep containing. He talked to Lara. He didn't plan to, but she called one Sunday evening, and she could hear it in his voice, and she was his sister, and there was no point pretending. He told her everything. Lara, to her credit, didn't say, "I told you so," even though she had, at various points, implied it. What she said was, "Dill, when Renee left, you decided you were done, and I understood that. But you weren't done forever. You were done with that." A pause. Being afraid of being hurt again is human. Letting that fear take up every chair at the table forever. That's just sad. "I have Poppy to think about," he said. "Poppy told me last month that you need a grown-up Valentine," Lara said immediately. Silence. "She told you that?" "She tells me everything. She's 6 and terrifyingly perceptive, and she clearly got that from me." A beat. "What are you actually scared of? On Dylan?" He was quiet for a long time. "That it won't work," he said finally. "And I'll have to feel all of that again. And this time I won't be able to hide it from Poppy." Lara was quiet, too. "That's real," she said. "That's a real thing to be afraid of." Another pause. "But can I tell you something? Poppy's not going to be protected by you being alone. She's going to learn how to love by watching you love." He didn't answer. He didn't need to. He already knew she was right. He was walking back from lunch the following Tuesday, mid-May, one of the first real warm days of the year, when he heard it. Loud, louder than he'd ever heard her. Petra's office, her voice, which was never raised. "Told you 3 times, Holt." And then a male voice, the guy from Chicago, aren't the one who'd grabbed her elbow at the Christmas party, cutting through. "I'm just saying the numbers don't lie, Petra." "Don't Petra me. I'm your regional director and you'll address me accordingly. All I'm saying is if Ford is such an asset, maybe he belongs in Chicago." Dylan stopped walking. "And if you have a personal interest in keeping him here, then frankly the board should know about that interest." Dead silence. Dylan's chest went cold. Then, "Get out of my office," Petra said. Quiet. Completely, dangerously quiet. "Petra, I said get out." A beat. Then footsteps. Then Holt walked past the open door, past where Dylan was standing in the hallway, and didn't look at him. Dylan stood there. Then he walked to Petra's office. She was standing behind her desk, very still, looking at the window. "I heard," he said. She turned. Something in her expression. She was keeping it together, but barely. "It's nothing," she said. "He was out of line. I'll handle it." "Petra." "Dylan, I said I'll handle it." "I don't care about Holt," he said. She looked at him. "I care about what he implied," Dylan said. "About you. About the idea that you might have done something wrong by—" He stopped. By caring about me, he didn't say. But she heard it. She looked at him with something raw in her expression. "I haven't done anything wrong," she said quietly. "I know. I've been careful. Everything by the book. Petra." He took a step toward her. I know that." Her chin lifted, proud even now, especially now. And Dylan stood there, looking at this woman who had been careful and patient and brave and honest and had asked for nothing except for him to see her. And he finally let the wall down. "I've been unfair to you," he said. She blinked. "Dylan, no, let me—" He pushed out a breath. "You've been honest with me for months, and I've been running. Not because I don't—" He stopped. Tried again. "I've been scared. I've been so scared of wanting this and having it fall apart that I convinced myself that not starting was safer. She was very still. But it's not safe, he said. It's just, he shook his head. Empty. It's just empty, and I'm tired of it. She said nothing. He looked at her. I think about you, he said, and his voice was steady now, even though nothing in him felt steady. All the time, more than I let myself admit. But you notice things, small things, and you show up and you're honest even when it's uncomfortable, and you made my kid's life matter to you before you even met her, and I don't... He stopped. I don't know what that means for logistics or work or anything else, and I know the timing is... I know there are complications, but Dylan. I'm getting there. Dylan! Her voice cracked, just slightly. Stop. Stop. I need you to stop being so measured right now. I'm trying to tell you. I know what you're trying to tell me, and... She pressed her hand to her forehead, and suddenly she laughed, half frustrated, half something else entirely. And the laugh was helpless and bright, and nothing like the carefully composed director who ran meetings and managed crises. 4 months, she said. With your 4 months of succulents and sticky notes and Christmas party conversations and conference room almost moments, and you standing in my doorway every single time, like you're about to say something and then you say, nothing, good meeting, and walk out. I know. Do you have any idea how many times I thought I was imagining it? How many times I replayed every single interaction wondering if I'd just completely lost my mind? Petra. Is it a crime? She said. And yes, she raised her voice. It came out somewhere between laughing and exasperated and desperate. Is it a crime I love you, you idiot? The office went completely silent. And then the sound from the open plan area outside, keyboards, phone calls, the ambient hum of an office afternoon, crashed back in. And Dylan stared at her. And she stared back. And her face was flushed, and her hair was coming out of its bun, and her eyes were bright and fierce, and she had the expression of a woman who had just said the thing that cannot be unsaid, and was waiting, with her chin lifted because Petra Callum did not lower her chin for anyone, to find out what happened next. You love me? He said. She held his gaze. Yeah, she said, I do. She breathed out. And I know the timing is, and I know it's complicated because of your situation and the work dynamic, and... He crossed the room. 3 steps. Dylan. He took her face in his hands. And he kissed her. Not tentatively. Not carefully. The way you kiss someone when you've been holding yourself back for so long that the holding back itself had become exhausting. She made a small sound of surprise, and then her hands were at his forearms and she was kissing him back, and the city was outside the window, and the office was outside the glass door, and none of it mattered at all. When they pulled apart, she was breathing unevenly. He pressed his forehead to hers. I love you too, he said. Quietly, directly, without all the careful framing he'd been hiding behind. I have for a while. I was just scared, she said. Terrified, he corrected. She laughed, pressed her forehead harder against his. Me too, she said. For the record, you were terrified? You were completely unreadable half the time, and the other half you looked at me like I was... She stopped. Like what? A pause. Like I was worth staying for, she said softly. He pulled her in. She let him, and they stood there in her office in the afternoon light, both of them slightly shaking and laughing quietly, and the tight-locked, quiet thing in Dylan's chest was gone. Just gone. Like it had never been there. Here's what happened next. The work situation was handled properly. Petra disclosed the relationship to HR and to the board before the week was out. She was transparent. She was professional. She requested that Dylan's performance reviews be handled by a neutral third party. Something she'd apparently already been thinking through because, as she explained to Dylan later, she'd been hoping for this outcome, and she didn't do things halfway. Holt tried to make noise about it. The board reviewed everything and found exactly zero evidence of professional impropriety. Holt went back to Chicago. He was not missed. But Dylan told Poppy about Petra on a Saturday morning in early June. He sat her down at the kitchen table, the same table where she'd asked him if he was lonely, with 2 plates of pancakes. From scratch, he'd gotten much better at them, and said he had something to tell her. Poppy, who had the instincts of a seasoned detective, put her fork down immediately and said, "Is it about the lady?" He blinked. "What lady?" "The lady you smile at your phone for," Poppy said, with magnificent precision. "You do this thing," she demonstrated, dropping her chin and pressing her lips together, which was apparently his trying not to smile face. "Whenever you get a text at night." He stared at his daughter. "You're 6. "Almost 7, she corrected. He laughed. Fully. And told her about Petra. They met for the first time on a Sunday in July, on a park. Petra arrived with a small paper bag from a bakery, because she was nervous and baking, she'd explained, was her anxiety reflex. But she couldn't actually bake worth anything, so she'd bought things instead. Poppy walked up to her without hesitation. The way Poppy did everything, direct, fearless, full speed. "You're Petra," she announced. "I am," Petra said. "And you're Poppy." "Do you like ladybugs?" Petra blinked. Then she reached into her jacket pocket and produced a small book about insects she'd thought to bring. The chapter on ladybugs was bookmarked. Poppy stared at it. Then she looked up at Petra. Then she looked at Dylan. Then she took Petra's hand and said, "Come on, I want to show you the duck pond." And that was that. Later, sitting on a bench while Poppy ran ahead towards the water, Petra leaned her shoulder against Dylan's. "She's extraordinary," she said quietly. "Yeah," he agreed. "She's like you. She's better than me." Petra smiled, tilted her head to rest against his shoulder. "I don't know about that," she said. They sat there in the summer afternoon, watching Poppy chase a very unimpressed duck around the edge of the pond, and Dylan thought about all the Tuesdays he'd spent staring at a wall that no longer existed. He thought about Poppy's question. "Are you happy?" He was. He genuinely was. 1 year. 1 year from that Tuesday in late October when Dylan Ford walked past a woman standing in the middle of an office with a coffee in one hand and a manila folder in the other. A lot had changed. Dylan had been promoted. Not by Petra. The board had handled it clean and fair. But he'd been promoted. It was because it turned out that being good at your job and having someone who believed in you loudly were not unrelated things. Petra was still regional director. Still the first one in the office. Still had the kind of laugh that took you 3 seconds to catch up with. Still pressed her thumbnail to her lip when she was thinking. Dylan had come to love that gesture. There were now 3 succulents on his desk. Poppy had named all of them. They were called Gerald, Patches, and Sir Reginald the Brave, and Dylan had been strictly informed that she was their godmother, and he was to treat them accordingly. Petra had a drawing on her desk now. Poppy had made it. 2 stick figures and a smaller stick figure between them, holding hands. 3 people under a yellow sun with too many rays. That on the first anniversary of the day, Petra had yelled at him in her office, which they had quietly begun celebrating as something of a private joke. Dylan showed up at her door with 2 coffees. She looked up. "What's this?" "A year ago today," he said, "a very important person told me she loved me." Petra's mouth curved. "She also called you an idiot, if I recall." "That was the part I needed to hear," he said. "Honestly." She took the coffee. He sat across from her, and they looked at each other across a desk in a glass-walled office above a city that neither of them had entirely figured out. 2 people who had been lonely in their own specific ways, and had found each other by accident and stubbornness, and the patience of a woman who refused to stop planting things in difficult ground. "Regrets?" he asked. She pretended to think about it. "Sir Reginald is looking a little droopy," she said. "I think Poppy is overwatering him. I'll let her know. Other than that?" She held his gaze. "No, not one." He reached across the desk. She put her hand in his. "Here's the thing about walls, people. We build them because we've been hurt, because we loved and lost, and the losing was so enormous that the only logical response seemed to be, never again. And the walls work, for a while. They keep us safe, they keep us functional, they keep us able to make lunches and file reports and show up every day. But walls don't love you back. They don't leave notes on your desk. They don't show up with a ladybug pin for your kid. They don't stand across a conference room and wait, with patience, or with quiet bravery, for you to remember that you are allowed to want things. Dylan Ford learned what most of us need to learn, eventually, that being safe and being alive are not the same thing. That love is not a threat to the life you've built. That sometimes the thing you've been most afraid of opening yourself to is the exact thing that was missing all along. And sometimes, the moment it breaks open is when someone who loves you has finally had enough and yells at you across an office at the top of their professional, composed, completely lost-it voice. And you realize all you had to do was listen. If this story moved you the way it moved me, if you've ever built a wall and forgotten there was a door, if you've ever had someone care about you more than you let yourself accept, subscribe to Crest Stories. And share this with someone who needs to hear it. Until next time, take care of yourselves and take care of each other.